what? Content of
There we
this
go.
meeting is being sent to a third party. Got it. There we go. We're going live on YouTube. Little Metal Foxes Tooltip Tuesday. That's right. We got some tool tips for you today. It is the big Micron versus Grit Smackdown. Hey there. Welcome.
Hello.
I'm Jennifer from Little Metal Foxes, and I've got Helen with me live from London. And
Ah,
we're going to be doing Micron versus Grit comparison. The grind down. With what is a micron and why is it different than grit, and why do some things get measured in microns versus grits, and what the heck is a micron anyway, Helen?
Micron graded either silicon carbide or aluminum oxide, depending on, I guess, maybe the fineness. I'm not sure why, but those are the two in particular the 3M papers that you'll be showing in a minute.
Yes. Okay. So when we're talking about microns, we're talking about, it's actually an abbreviation or a shorthand for 1/1,000,000th of a meter. So like a millimeter is 1,000th of a meter. A centimeter is 1/100th of a meter. A micron is 1/1,000th of a meter. So we're talking about metric versus sandpaper, right?
Tiny.
Yeah, teeny tiny. So 1/1,000,000th of a meter. So teeny, teeny, teeny tiny. So some things, it's like when you're working with something like sandpaper, and some sandpapers or abrasive papers come in microns, or even your even little things like your grinding wheels, or things like little like the 3M little fingery wheel things, the little radial wheels, radial disc. Those a lot of times are measured in microns, and if you don't understand what microns are, you don't know how abrasive it's going to be. So here's the scoop. Here's the scoop on that. All right. So Helen is going to be posting a conversion chart, or a link to a conversion chart for us that has the conversions of grit to micron. So with things like sandpaper, to explain this, things like sandpaper. Sandpaper is actually made with silica sand on paper. It's glued on. It's glued on. So this stuff usually comes in coarser grits, and the grits are like how many particles are within a certain measurement. So this one has 120. Some have 600, which would be a finer grit because it has more tiny little grits in a very small space. But and this is aluminum oxide as well. But the thing about this is it's usually coarser grits, and they are usually used for things like softer materials like wood and things like that. But because this is actually like a grit that is like a silica grit or a aluminum carbide, aluminum oxide grit, it's not as consistent in size. It's not all the same size. It's very irregular, and it's how much of this will fit through a particular screen. So you're going to get unevenness. So if you use this on metal, you might see some scratching because it's got big grit and little grit, kind of all mixed together. The other thing about actual sandpaper is that originally it was actually made with sand that fit through grit, glued onto paper. The thing that most jewelers are using is a wet dry corundum paper, and this is usually made with silicon carbide or corundum that is machined to be a particular size grit, and it's on a
is it like more consistent?
Yeah, it's much more consistent than sandpaper would be. So it's also put on the type of paper that isn't going to break down in water. So you can use this wet or dry. This usually leaves more consistent surface on your metal, which is why most metalsmiths use wet dry paper instead of sandpaper. The other thing that's important to note about these, and this is true with, as our friend Chris Anderson from Lion Punch Forge was pointing out, this is especially true when you're working with things like lapidary stuff, because the grit will start to break down, the bigger grit will wear out. And so suddenly what you thought was 600 grit is maybe working like a 1200 grit and not removing as much material as it would be because you ground it down finer. So that happens with sandpaper and wet dry papers as well. The reason all this came up was because we were doing the finishing and polishing class this weekend, and some of the stuff was measured in grit, some of it was measured in microns, and wanting to explain that to a broader audience. One of the things that I have in my studio that I was showing the students is that I've got my my abrasive papers that came, and these are on like a cloth backbone.
Yeah, they're like it's like a Tyvek, so it's a non-woven, very flexible surface that they've the abrasive has been adhered to.
Yeah, so it doesn't tear like paper will. But usually you'll find this in like that. Ta-da! You'll find it in like different colors, so you know what the color codes are. However,
Yes.
with the color coding, it's hard to know because you're like, well, what color means what? What does it mean? And so
sometimes the packages don't tell you. So I have made a little business card. On one side, I have all like green equals 600, or was it? Hold on, no, 400, and then gray equals 600, and yada yada yada. So all the way down.
So the chart that came with these actually has, I just realized, all of the, I realized it when I got it, but I forgot it, has like all of the micron conversions on there, and what color paper is what micron or what grit. So you
and
know
what substance, whether it's the silicon carbide or the aluminum oxide.
Right. So this gives me a little bit better idea of, you know, what grits are what. But because this is easy to write on, and I'll do this sometimes with my other materials too, is I've got the grit and the micron on there, right? So the thing that's important to know.
That's actually really smart. I need to do that.
Right? That's my tool tip. Write it on the thing. But it's really good to know, especially for things like your abrasive wheels.
Yes.
Because a lot of times those are in microns for polishing, and it doesn't correlate, you know, to grit necessarily. But to put it into perspective, your skin.
We have a question.
Oh, okay. What's the question?
Oh, Donald C wants to know, is one brand better than another?
It really, a lot of times it's personal preference. Especially, you know, if you're looking at, you know, 3M versus, you know, some no name brand or, you know, whatever. I mean, 3M, you know, is known for their quality of abrasives. So I would definitely say if you're, you know, a lot of these are made by 3M, but packaged under a different name. And some of them are, you know, made in other countries and, or, you know, different kinds of grits. So I'm not really sure that it makes a big difference as far as the brand name, but it does make a difference if you're looking at the grit and if you're especially looking for things like or like little silicone wheels like these, what the binder is for it. The rubberized binders like Kratex, don't use those at all. If you've got Kratex, just throw them out because they are such a huge health hazard compared to the newer ones that are made with silicone.
Okay.
Right? That's the only one I would avoid, or the Kratex, actual Kratex wheels. They're rubberized wheels, and the amount of particles in them is just, it's not good for you to breathe in. None of it's good for you to breathe in, but especially Kratex, because it's rubber and not, which has a lot of sulfur and other stuff in it, not necessarily silicone.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, which is a food grade silicone versus, or silicone versus, you know, kind of a nasty
crap
rubber binder, which can also contain like petroleum stuff that's not great for you either. But anyway, the thing that's good to know, thank you for your question, Donald. The thing that's good to know is that, just for perspective on kind of a grit, is that human skin is rated at 800 grit. So
your fingerprint.
Your fingerprints are rated at like an 800 grit. And which makes them, with the amount of oil that most people have in their skin, ideal for polishing things like waxes, because you've got a little bit of an 800 grit and some oil in there. So if you're like, boopity boop boop boop, rub it up on some carving wax, you'll find that it actually smooths the wax, and that's why. But it's also why skin wears down things like chain rings, earrings, things like that.
Plating. Yeah.
Plating, yeah, because you're actually like sanding it off with your skin. So what is the difference? So you've got micron. 1 micron equals 14,000 grit.
Nice.
That's how small 1 micron is. It's equal to 14,000 grit.
I think the highest I have in wet dry is like 1,500, and I was like, wow, this like phew. I mean, it doesn't even feel like it's grit.
Right. And for doing things like polishing like marble countertops and things like that, it might be like 300,000 grit. And that would be equivalent to about like 6 microns. So to give you kind of a perspective on that. So what is like 600 grit would be 30 microns. So the more microns you have, the coarser,
rougher,
because you're like adding microns on. With sandpaper, if you've got like the lower grits, like 100 grit is bigger, but it's a lower number. As you start adding numbers to grit, the numbers go up because it's like how many of those can you fit into a measured space. So if it's like I can fit 100 of those in a measured space, or 14,000 of them in a measured space. So that's the difference. Like grit measurement, micron measurement would be like you have 1 micron, you're measuring the micron itself, or you've got 30 microns, and you can kind of see like 30 microns is going to fit in this space, and that's how many. It's a unit of measurement rather than how many you can fit into a space.
Right.
So, metric versus grit.
Imperial.
Or so when you're looking at things like polishing wheels, and it says that it is like 2 micron, that's going to be a polishing compound that's equivalent to 10,000 grit. So very, very, very smooth. So yeah, teeny tiny grits.
Yeah.
Tiny. So that's why it's easier to measure them in microns than it is putting like, 10K grit.
Yeah. Yeah, I when you said that this was going to be our tool tip, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be great, because I had no idea. I was just like, well, I just test it, and then if it does a finish that I like, and I know the other ones go up to a higher polish, then I just, progress. But
yeah, it's like, well, how do you know what grit is what and what that means? It's like, what's the difference between like, 1 micron and 40 microns? Most people don't know. So like 40 microns would be 300 grit. And you're like, it sounds like it'd be really small. Like 40 microns is tiny. And it's like, no, 40 microns is a lot of microns. And so, yeah. Anyway, let's see what 100 grit would be. 100 microns is 120 grit. So when you're looking, it's a lot closer there. But yeah, 60 microns is 250 grit. So yeah, but there you go, people. That's how you know. And
so one little tidbit, if you just don't know, so like the wet dry aluminum oxides, or no, I'm sorry, not the aluminum oxide, the corundum is actually industrial grade rubies and sapphires.
Yes.
Or within that very isn't that like a Mohs hardness of 9?
I think so, yeah. And this is
it's really hard. It's just under diamonds.
Yeah, so if it says corundum paper, that's what it is. A lot of wet dry papers are also silicon carbide instead of corundum.
Things.
Yeah. Corundum. So
we use in glass, you use silicon carbide to do your grinding.
But and that's the other thing between this and the sandpaper, is that this is ground to a specific size and then run through a sieve to make sure, filter, to make sure that it's the exact consistent size. So your wet dry paper is much more consistent in its nature than
regular sandpaper. Yeah.
So anyway, stuff like this would not, like, this is 1200 grit. And this is like smoother than my skin is. So it's, I could like polish my fingernails practically with this.
Oh yeah, get a nice shine.
Get a shine on there. Yeah, exactly. So there you go, people. That's grit versus microns for today. We've got a bunch of fun classes coming up, and
Yeah, we do.
if you
Let
have,
me
if you
let me
do,
pull up the website.
if you do have a particular brand or question about grits and microns, please put them in the questions below. We always try and get back to and answer those in a reasonable amount of time, and sooner or later we usually answer them.
Oh no, we're usually really good. Within 24 to 48 hours, we
Yes,
are
yeah,
responding.
absolutely. So if you have a question, please let us know. And if you have a tool tip you want to suggest, put it in the comments below. We always take a look for those.
Absolutely.
Those kinds of like puzzling questions, like what is a micron anyway? It's a unit of measurement.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Like last week, we were inspired by nanotape,
Yeah.
and so like,
Yeah.
what else can we use?
Yeah, one of our students in Open Studio Access brought to us
Yep.
a remarkable miracle product. We were like, nanotape.
Everybody get some.
This is amazing. So yeah, if you haven't seen our tooltip on tape, that was last week. So go watch that.
Yes.
But please hit the like button and subscribe, and you'll know when we're live. If you want more tool tips, we've got like 150 of them here on the YouTube channel, and we have a lot of other people that we have interviewed and talked to, and studio tours, and a bunch of other free content for helping you in your studio. So please support us by subscribing. The subscribe button over there.
So actually, let's talk about upcoming classes just real quick.
Okay.
So we have Cut Card coming up, which is a really beautiful setting that Julia is doing. And then you're doing the Fancy and Fragile, which is awesome.
And fragile. Yeah, Fancy and Fragile. So for people that like to set things that are a little unusual, found objects, enamels, like little precious things that it's like, I don't know how I'm going to set this on anything. It's like, do I use prongs? Do I use bezels? Do I use glue? What am I using to set this? Do I need to drill a hole in it? What's happening? So there's lots of things that I use in my work that I have to figure out how to set it. So.
Yeah, and going back to the Cut Card, I love it because it's just such a clean and simple, and yet you can do a lot with it. You can change your profile. You can really make a setting that's unique and beautiful with that.
And truly one of a kind. Yeah.
Yeah. Go take that class.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it solves other problems of construction as well.
Yes.
You're like trying to figure out how to put like parts together. It's really good for that alone.
Yeah. And you can take that particular technique and apply it to so many other things that you can make some really spectacular pieces.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And one other class that's brand new that we are super excited about is Tisha Abrahamson is teaching making tools out of borosilicate glass tools with your Smith Little.
So what would I use a borosilicate burnisher for, Helen?
Oh my God, all kinds of things. But in particular, because our follow-up class is going to come for this, is Kumbu.
Right.
So you can use these because they are not as sensitive to heat as other burnishers can be. Right. And so and because you're creating them in fire, they are super smooth and really great for doing Kumbu or burnishing. I would say more delicate burnishing. I wouldn't necessarily put a lot of pressure on these, but for Kumbu, they are perfect.
Yeah.
And
they are tough enough for like small scale burnishing settings, for edges, for things like that are like shining the edge of the metal up, because they're so slick and glassy. Yeah. They leave that finish on your metal. Yes. But for Kumbu, they're so slick that they don't scratch it and they don't distribute the heat, so they are able to lay it down without pulling it off. So.
Right, exactly. And then you're not burning your hand either with the tool,
right.
So it's
because they don't heat up. Yeah.
Yeah. And then let's see what else we got. One more. I think we should do one more that we're gonna what exciting thing. Way out in May. I mean, we've got Leslie Perino coming back with enameling. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, that'll be great. Yeah.
I love her.
Brilliant. I love her. And her enameling classes. She's going to be coming to us from Chicago. Leslie does fabulous, like textured enamels, and she's got these amazing ways to like imprint your metal and then enamel it to get patterns and things. And it's just absolutely fun.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
And then of course,
I've learned more from Leslie doing enameling in one class
yes,
in the last 30 years about enameling. So she's really good. She's really good.
Yeah. And then of course, our open studios.
Open studio access. Absolutely. If you at all are needing support in your studio, if you're looking for a community that is wanting to help and support you and answer questions, and if you've got information to share, regardless of what level you're at, it doesn't matter what metalsmithing level you're working at or jewelry level you're working at. We're there to just in a conversational forum, share questions, do some research, answer, give you feedback, support you when you're sick, lonely.
Yep.
All those things. It's more entertaining than any podcast, except maybe my favorite murder. But sometimes just as dark. So I don't know. So anyway, but yeah, do join us for Open Studio Access. And basically, it's so inexpensive. We do it at cost. So that we can provide this for the students, and you don't have to be taking another class with us. We just really want to support the community, and it is, it's basically less expensive than taking 2 hours of one-on-one mentoring, but you get an entire month's worth of access. So it just works out beautifully for our students, and we've had people that have been doing Open Studio Access since we started back in August. So we love it. Yeah. All right, people.
Okay.
Happy Tuesday. And we will see you. And next time we're going to be talking about what are we going to do
next week? Have a list. Let me look at my list. I actually have my
fluxes, barrier versus flow fluxes.
Yes. And that came from Open Studios too.
It did. So if you have questions, have some information to share, please put it down below. We'd love to hear from you. Hit that like button. Yay!
Yes. Subscribe. We're awesome.